So excited to have you all here today to learn about how to travel with a pet. So we're going to just give a couple minutes to let everyone join. But while you're coming in, if you wouldn't mind in the chat box, go ahead and let us know where you're calling in from. And also let us know what number event this is, whether it's your first, your 20th, your 60th. We're happy to have you all here. And then I'd love to know if you have ever traveled with your dog or any pet for that matter. And if you haven't, if you're planning to in the future. So you can go ahead and use the chat box and write that in. We'd love to hear where everyone is from. So my name is Laura. I am one of the San Diego chapter leaders, and I'm really excited to be hosting this event for all of you today. And there's Candy's dog. Yes, of course, if you have dogs or any pets, you can put them up into the screen. We'd love to see them. So I think this is almost my 70th event. I've been to quite a few. I've heard tons of different speakers and topics, and I think this is the first one we've had about pet travel. So I'm really excited to learn all about this. I know my dog, Callie, I'm sure is excited for me to hear all about this as well. So before we get started with the presentation, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to just give you a quick update. I think you can all see that. Okay, perfect. I just wanted to give you guys a quick update about the Nomadic Network in case some of you are new. So the Nomadic Network is a global community of travel enthusiasts who inspire each other to travel better, cheaper, and longer. So about a year ago, we launched this right around this time when we had in-person meetings all around the world. I actually hosted one in San Diego, and it was fantastic to meet other like-minded travelers in our community and just get to know everyone a little bit better. So as you know, the pandemic hit, and so we had to pull a lot of these into virtual events, which actually has been wonderful. We've had these for many months now, and we've had a variety of speakers and topics, and we've also been able to connect with people from all across the world. So I think it's been a little bit of a blessing as well. While we're really excited to go back to the in-person events at some point, having this balance of the virtual events for now is wonderful as well. So just a couple housekeeping items I wanted to mention. Definitely keep your cameras on if you're comfortable doing that. We love seeing your smiling faces and some animals in there as well, which is fantastic. I am going to keep everyone muted. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead, write them in the chat box. Just make sure you write question first and then list your question out after that so I can keep track. And at the end, I'll make sure we get those all answered for you. And definitely feel free to use the chat box to connect with everyone. That's where you obviously ask your questions. You can share any relevant info you have or personal experiences. We'd love to hear and just use that to your advantage. And then replays are going to be available for this presentation for Patreon members, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And basically the speakers are here to do this out of their kindness of our hearts. So we really appreciate, especially Candy being here today with us. So real quick about the Patreon community, if you value our travel community and want to be a part of this exclusive group, I definitely welcome you to check it out. There are tons of great perks. You get past and future the Nomadic Network event replays, such as this one. Nomadic Matt shares some personal stories you might not have heard before on his blog. He's also asked for input on some of his content. He has live Q&As. You get free signed books, free guides. And there's also an exclusive Facebook group, which I'm part of the Patreon group. And I have to tell you, it's a really great intimate group to be a part of. So if it's something you are looking into and want to give back, you can head on over to patreon.com/Nomadic Matt. And if it's a monthly membership with just a very small amount, I think you can do a minimum of $5 a month. So it's just a great way to give back to the Nomadic Matt and Nomadic Network community. And if you aren't able to do that, you can always do a one-time donation via PayPal at matt@nomadicmatt.com. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Candy. I'm so excited to introduce her. Candy Pilar Godoy has traveled to almost 40 countries. She speaks 3 languages and she has traveled with her dogs and lived abroad with them as well. She currently lives in New York City, and she lives with her dog Boogie, Marcelo, and her cat Kitty. And if you want to follow her on her, she talks all about her pet travels on her blog, boogieThePug.com. So without further ado, Candy, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can learn all about these wonderful tips and tricks on traveling with a dog.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Candy. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope that we can have some fun and you guys can get a bit of knowledge about pet travel. So again, I'm Candy. Now it's over 40 countries that I've traveled to. I am a travel addict, like I am assuming many of you are, and I also love animals. So my two biggest passions in life are probably travel and animals. And as you can see in the photos here, I've really tried to incorporate the two wherever I go. So that's me and my dad with a giraffe in Kenya. That's me feeding chimpanzees in the Republic of Congo. And then me with a cute little panda bear in China. So as a traveler, I mean, I think a lot of us hear that if you traveled, you should be attached to as few things as possible, you know, as few material items, you shouldn't have a pet, etc. But I really love animals. And after a while, once I was an adult and I graduated from college, I really wanted to have my own. So while living in Brazil, I found this stray little kitty who I named Kitty, a little cat. This was over 10 years ago. I still have him today, and I adopted him. And then I eventually, a couple years later, moved back to New York City, and my partner and I adopted two dogs, a pug named Boogie and a chihuahua named Marcelo. And so I've been able to luckily travel a lot for pleasure and for work. I work as a photography producer, and I learned over the years how to bring my dogs with me. Sometimes my travels were for longer periods of time, like a month or 2 months. And, you know, I really missed my dogs. I wanted them to start spending time with me abroad. And luckily, it's possible. So I'm here to share a bit of info on how you can do it too, how it's not as hard as people think it is, and how now people are traveling more than ever. I mean, in 2018, the National Pet Owner Survey found out that 37% of pet owners travel with their pets every year. That number is up 19% from a decade ago, and it's even higher today. So it's not just me doing it, it's a lot of other people. So I'm going to share a couple of basic tips. If you have more specific questions, you can ask them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. But since I don't know everyone's level of pet travel, maybe you don't even have a dog yet, these are just some basic things to get you started. All right, so to kick it off, tips for traveling with your dog. My first number one biggest tip for anyone is to check your energy. And I think this is a great tip whether you're traveling with a pet or not. If you are feeling anxious or nervous or frustrated, your dog is going to feel the same way. They pick up on our emotions and our energy and our vibes. So you want to stay positive, you know, positive vibes, stay calm, cool, collected. That way your dog will be happy and calm, cool, collected. If you're giving out negativity and your dog reads that, there's a bigger chance that they're going to act out. And you don't want a misbehaved dog if you're in an airport or checking into a hotel. So definitely check your energy. Luckily, I'm like a pretty calm person, but my partner has a bit of anxiety. So he's had to learn to just like, you know, chill out when we're doing things like checking in at the airport, etc. And it really does make a difference. That leads me to start early. And by that, I mean, you can start traveling with your dog today. It doesn't necessarily mean hopping on a plane or getting on a train. You can travel locally, right? Some people, they'll have a dog and they'll have a routine and they'll live with their dog at home, and their dog will be at home and maybe go to the backyard to use the bathroom, and that's it. And that's not great if you plan to travel with your dog. You got to get your dog used to different situations, crowds, meeting new people, being around other animals and other dogs. Kind of, you know, start to stimulate them so that when they are in these new situations and they have new experiences, those new experiences aren't anxiety provoking for them. So I always tell people to start small, you know, stay active, do things like maybe take your dog for a walk and go on a new route, or get into a car and take a 15-minute drive, you know, something small. And you can really start at any point with your dog. I feel, you know, both my dogs were adopted as adults, so they weren't traveling as puppies. One is from a puppy mill, so he definitely wasn't traveling. The other, I'm not really sure of his background, but you know, I started with them when they were adults and they were able to learn these things little by little. And now they're expert travelers. They're great in any situation. So, oh, the last tip I have about that also is if your dog is going to be in a carrier, like on a plane or on a train, familiarize them with the carrier, make it a safe space, have it open, make them know that when they go in, they're going to get treats. It's going to be like a nice, cozy area for them. They're going to like it. If you're taking a plane ride, don't purchase a dog carrier and open it from Amazon the day of the flight, you know? Start early with them. And that leads me into practice. So practice really does make perfect with dog travel. You know, start with shorter trips. Like I said, maybe a little car ride, a short car ride, a shorter flight, a walk to a new dog park. Hopefully your first experience traveling with your dog won't be like a 10-hour flight to Paris, you know, you'll have like a shorter flight so that you know how they react on the airplane, etc. Practice with them, you know, simulation and practice are super important. So they know what to expect and you know what to expect from them. That leads me into policies. I am a bit anal. So I say definitely double check policies, if not triple check them, especially now in the age of COVID. Places are changing their policies day to day. And I mean airlines, hotels, businesses, etc. So when in doubt, always ask, never assume. I know of a woman who booked a hotel on booking.com. She used the pet friendly filter. She found a hotel that was pet friendly. She booked her stay. And then a couple days before her stay, she emailed the hotel asking a question. And they were like, oh, whoa, we're not pet friendly. And I guess they had changed their policy and they forgot to update their booking.com listing. So suddenly she was in this huge mess. You know, she had to figure out canceling that reservation. She had to find a new place to stay, all within a couple days. And so if she had before booking just given them a call or emailed them and just gotten like a double check or a triple check on their pet friendly policy, that would have saved her a lot of trouble and money. So I always tell people to double and triple check policies before confirming anything. Because I'm anal, I like to get both verbal and written confirmation. Something as small as, you know, if you give them a call and you're talking to someone and they're telling you something, ask them for their name and reference that conversation in an email, etc. Next, I have be organized. This is especially important if you're flying internationally. Just like you have your own travel needs and paperwork, your passport, your vaccination yellow booklet, your dog is going to have their health records and their paperwork that they're going to require. So again, I'm a little anal. I have a binder, a pet binder, where I keep all of my pets' important documents, their rabies, vaccinations, etc., vet information. And then you can also just like take a quick snapshot of these documents, you know, have a photo album on your phone called Pets and keep the pictures of these documents. If you are abroad or in another city and you need another copy of, let's say, a rabies vaccination, it's very possible that your vet's office is slow to get back to you. Maybe you can't reach them because you're abroad, etc. So it's great to just have backup of these important documents for yourself. All right, and lastly, be prepared. And by that, I mean, make sure you pack the essentials. I say this because not every location has a pet store. And if they do, they don't always offer the same products that you're used to or that you want to use, etc. This is especially important if your dog is on medication or if they eat a special diet. You might not be able to find these products in another city, town, country, etc. So just as you have a packing list for yourself, make a little quick checklist for your dog and know what to pack in case you can't find it where you're going. Oops, sorry, I skipped one. All right, so tips for traveling with your dog on a budget. Yes, it is possible. Just like there's like a whole spectrum for human travel, you know, high-end resort, super expensive travel versus budget on a shoestring. The same goes for traveling with dogs. You know, I used to think before I did it that you had to have a lot of money to travel with your pets and that you'd be spending buttloads of cash, of extra cash that could be spent on something else. But no, you can travel with your dog on a budget. Here are a couple tips to do that. Number one, don't pay hotel fees. This is where they get you, you know, like some hotels will charge you per night if you're staying with a pet, some will charge you an extra cleaning fee, etc. But nowadays, because there are so many pet travelers, there's many hotels that are chains or not that will let you stay at no extra cost with your pet. So I have a whole list of these on my website, but some of them, just for you to know, are like Kimpton, La Quinta, Red Roof Inn, and those that I've mentioned are international. So you can't only stay in them in the US, you can stay in them abroad, etc. I like to kind of like find a chain that you like and then like build a rapport with them. And, you know, it's great. Like a lot of these chains are super nice to dog travelers. So skip those fees. I've also stayed in tons of Airbnbs without paying an extra fee. So that's another option. Another way to save money is to take your dog with you. So it can sometimes actually be cheaper to travel with your dog than to leave them at home and pay for dog boarding or a pet sitter. You know, anyone here that has a dog knows that those costs can be super high. You know, if you're paying like $50 to $100 a night and you go away for 10 days or 2 weeks, that really adds up. So it might, in fact, save you money to take your dog with you. Next is to go to free events. So for those of you in New York City, I have a calendar on my blog that shares dog-friendly events happening throughout the city. And the majority of those are free. I've been to free dog events in Brazil, in Mexico, in Guatemala. There are so many happening, like more than you would even imagine. It's really fun. It's a way to meet local people. It's a way to get tips on dog stuff or even just like local stuff, you know, just talking to dog people. I feel like, you know, when I'm abroad, even when I'm at home, but especially when I'm abroad and I'm outside walking my dog, you know, people smile at you. So it's like an easy way to meet new people, get tips. And a lot of these events are free, like I said. So you're not going to be spending a bunch of money to meet locals. And the last one kind of plays in with that. Reach out to local dogs on Instagram or Facebook. I love to do this. So when I'm traveling with my dogs, you know, it's not super easy to go online and look up 10 best things to do in Mexico City. A lot of those things will have nothing to do with dogs. So if you just go on Instagram and you look up a hashtag like hashtag dogs of Mexico City or dogs of Mexico, etc., you'll see like the dog people that are online. And trust me, there are dog people all over the world. Or if you go on Facebook or meetup.com and you look up groups, dogs of blank, you know, in Rio, I was part of a Facebook group called Pugs of Rio de Janeiro. And these groups are really, I mean, they're like niches within niches. There can be a group based on breed, like I'm part of a lot of pug groups, or based on the size of your dog, or based on, you know, hiking with dogs, just like activities you like to do. Those are resources that I always try and tap into because local dog owners can give you the best tips on things to do, ways to save money, which vet to go to, what should I watch out for. You know, before going to Guatemala, I reached out to some Guatemalan dog owners and they're like, oh, we now have an outbreak of XYZ, so make sure your dog has this shot, or, you know, go here, they have the best dog clothes, etc. So these are like super valuable resources. And, you know, I have always had good experiences reaching out to dog people in other places. So yeah, definitely give it a try. Okay, pet-friendly accommodation. This is a big one because I think that a lot of people, besides being nervous about flying with dogs, a lot of people are nervous about finding appropriate accommodation. They think that you're going to have to stay in like a crappy place because most places don't allow dogs, but you'll be surprised, many do. So some just general tips on finding and helping you find pet-friendly accommodation are to, number one, consider your options. Nowadays, travel accommodations are endless. So, you know, I wouldn't say strictly only consider hotels. There's so many things you can consider: resorts, glamping, RVs, bed and breakfasts, couch surfing, etc. There are a lot of options out there. Next is to ask the right questions. I feel like dog people might not realize this, but there are so many questions to ask, especially if you're staying in a hotel, because every business has different policies, right? And their policies are constantly changing. I've stayed in hotels where dogs are only allowed on certain floors, or there are certain designated rooms for dogs to stay in, and they're near the elevator. So if your dog doesn't like noise, you might be hearing the ding from the elevator all throughout the day. These are things to consider, especially if you have a large dog or if you're traveling with multiple dogs like I do. So questions to ask before you book: is there a fee? How many dogs are allowed to stay in each room? How many pets are allowed in the hotel at a time in general? What pet-friendly amenities does the hotel offer, etc. Just to have as much information as possible to ensure that this is the right place for you and your dog to stay, and to ensure that your stay will be comfortable. Next is don't stop at no. Now, this one I know people might be like, huh? But what I mean by that is, so for example, when I'm going to a new place, especially if I'm staying for an extended period of time, I usually like to stay in Airbnbs because they offer things like, a kitchen or extra space that hotels tend to not have. And I always first search my location using the pet-friendly filter. But if I don't find some pet-friendly options that I like, or if there aren't any that really speak to me, I'll still check options that are not pet-friendly on Airbnb. And if I find something that I like, I will send the host a message. I will explain who I am, who my dogs are, and why we'd be respectful guests. And while some politely decline, which is totally cool, some will be like, okay. I think I've stayed in more non-pet friendly Airbnbs at this point than I have pet friendly ones, because I've done this. And, one thing that's really helped is that I've racked up a lot of positive reviews on my Airbnb, and those positive reviews always mention my dogs. So I always tell the host, please read my reviews, like check it out. I'm a pet traveler. My dogs have a lot of experience traveling. They're very respectful. We've only had positive experiences, etc. And that's really helped me out. Your dog best. So if you think that it's a situation that your dog will be okay in, like, why not try? The worst that can happen is they say no, and then you just try someplace else. And if you don't feel comfortable, like I once booked an Airbnb and the host kept asking me questions about the dogs on the furniture, etc. And I was like, I don't want to risk getting a negative review, and I don't want to risk an uncomfortable stay. So I just canceled and picked someplace else. Going in with that is the next one: be honest. Because the truth is that, like, dogs aren't perfect all the time. And chances are maybe your dog has a couple things that hosts might not want to hear about. So whether you're going on vacation or you're booking an extended stay, it's always best to be honest with the hosts, because, if not, lying about anything could lead to being asked to leave. It could ruin your plans, ruin your stay, and it could ruin you or other dogs' owners' chances of staying at that place. So what I like to do is, I'm honest, of course, but I always like to add a positive. So for example, pugs shed a lot. So I will let people know that, but I'll follow up and say, I'm happy to sweep daily, and I'm happy to bring a dog bed to minimize fur on the furniture. So there's always a way you can spin it, right? Like, and if there is a negative quality about your dog, find something to balance it out, but be honest with the host, because, people don't like surprises. Lastly, there is the idea of pet welcoming versus pet tolerating. So some places, businesses, hotels, etc., are super pet welcoming. And as a dog owner, you can tell and you can feel that, right? The energy. Like, you walk into a hotel, some of them will give you a dog treat at check-in. They'll have dog beds waiting in the room. And those are really great experiences to have because you really feel welcome. Whereas there are other places that you can tell, like, they could really they really don't care about you and your dog, and they're just like tolerating your presence. And that doesn't feel so good. I mean, it doesn't feel good whether you have a dog or not. So I would say read reviews, talk to other people, really get a sense of a place to know that you'll be comfortable. Because I've stayed in pet tolerating places before, and it's just not so fun for you or your dog. So nowadays, since there's so many options, there's just so many pet welcoming places where it's just really kicks things up a notch and makes you feel at home. So I really recommend choosing those locations. And finally, I have some resources for pet travel. These are like the apps and the websites that I use the most. So for apps, the first is Bring Fido. So Bring Fido is kind of like the Yelp of the dog world. They help you locate nearby hotels, attractions, restaurants that are pet friendly. They're really great to have, especially if you're on a road trip. The next one is Pet First Aid by the American Red Cross. This app I love because they showcase the nearest emergency animal hospital. So if you're ever in a bind, if there's ever an emergency, you can open the app and find it, and you won't be just like caught Googling frantically. And they also have step-by-step instructions for like common pet emergencies and stuff. They're just like a good resource to have in case of anything. Hopefully you won't have to use them, but just in case, they're there. And finally, All Trails. For all of you that are active, All Trails has the largest collection of trail maps, and they have a pet-friendly filter. So you can find pet-friendly trails and hiking, etc. It's a fun way to get out there. They're free most of the time. And there's like reviews and pictures. So you can see where all the other dogs are hanging out too. The websites I use are my own, obviously. I have lots of like tips and tricks on my website. I hope that you'll check it out. I also use Go Pet Friendly a lot. Go Pet Friendly is written by a couple who hopped into an RV and traveled all around the United States with their dogs. And so they have tons of information for people traveling within the United States. They also have a road trip maker. So like you put in like where you want to go on a road trip, and they'll tell you like what's worth going to and where you can stop and where you can stay, etc. They're a really great resource, especially if you're planning a road trip. And then APHIS Pet Travel. If you plan to travel internationally with your dog, APHIS is going to be like your online Bible. It is the website for the United States Department of Agriculture, and they give you all of the information about what rules and regulations and things that you have to do and things that you need to go abroad with your pet. They are a great resource. Definitely check them out if you're planning to go abroad. And lastly, the most important thing is to have fun and to bond with your dog. I mean, traveling with my pets is amazing and time well spent, because I love my dogs and they just make every trip better for me. The memories are priceless, and you're just going to have so much fun. So I really think everyone should do it if you have a dog. Thanks, guys.
Candy, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Wow. I'm sure my dog, if she was listening in right now, would be quite jealous and wants to have me learn all these things and get started on a trip. So I really appreciate all of your insight on all of this.
Oh, no problem. I hope that it was helpful in some way for everyone.
Yeah, extremely helpful. I know I have a couple questions, and then I know some of you on the call, it looks like some of you have never traveled before with your dog, some have locally. I think some of you have internationally. So feel free to ask any of your questions, just put them in the chat box, and then we can ask Candy those. And then Candy, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see everyone? And just so you guys know, we put in the chat box a way that you can connect with Candy via her website, Instagram, or Twitter account. So definitely go follow her so you can continue to get all these tips whenever you may need to travel with your pup or furry animal. Okay, so I have a question. I was curious, when you travel, do you travel with one pet most of the time, or do you bring all of them?
Depends where I'm going and what I'm doing. I usually travel with both dogs always, but I did move to Brazil for about a year and a half recently. I just got back in March 2020 of this year, and I went with all 3 of them.
Wonderful. Was it difficult?
No, it wasn't as difficult as people think. On the way there, I had all 3 in cabin with me and my partner. And then on the way back, because of COVID and some policies changing with the airline, my cat had to travel in cargo, but it ended up being totally fine and much easier than I thought.
So your cat had to travel in the cargo, not the dogs.
Right.
Oh, interesting. I, for some reason, would think the opposite, but I guess depending on where you go, right, there's going to be different restrictions to that.
Right.
So I'm curious, how far in advance did you know about that? And did you have to plan and budget accordingly for your cat to travel?
Right. So I always tell people start as soon as you can. This is definitely not the kind of thing where like we started a week before. We started about a month before our flight to just make sure we had everything in order. It takes vet trips and paperwork, but as long as you start with enough time and you're organized, it's not difficult. I mean, it's kind of like sorting out your own travel stuff. Like I wouldn't tell someone, hey, book a flight in under a week and plan to get somewhere and know what's up. You know, you need time to kind of sort these things out. So for flying in cargo and both dogs in cabin, it took us about a month of just like, you know, it's not like we worked on it every day, but it's just like having a list, checking things off, making sure everything was set, and it was fine.
Okay. I have one more question, then I'll ask some of the other ones that I see coming in. You might have asked or mentioned this, I don't think so, but are there requirements of how many animals you can have on a plane for your personal that you bring?
It depends on the airline.
Okay.
Some airlines have restrictions. Some airlines don't allow any animals on the plane. Some will allow you to take 2 per person. Some will only allow you to take 1 per person. So again, like these things really vary. So if you hear or get a no from one airline, don't stop there. Figure out, you know, go on to the next one and see what their policy is, because it's sure to be different. They're not all the same.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've got a couple questions. So the first one is from Minerva, and she's curious if you could share a couple international destinations that you think are easiest to travel with dogs, pretty much both in terms of flying, the requirements for immigration, and just overall pet friendly.
Okay, so one thing I will say first is that every country has a different requirement for people to enter with a pet. So it's not going to be the same across the board. The hardest countries to go to are always islands. So Japan, Iceland, Australia, they're always the hardest. So they're always off my list because I'm just like, I don't want to deal with them. The easiest country, if you're American, to go to are Canada and Mexico. And that seems to be, tends to be like a pretty normal thing, that wherever country you're in, the ones that border it are easier to go into. And then also Europe is super easy for Americans to go to because Europe has a pet passport. So once you get your pet, the pet passport, it makes traveling within Europe or to and from Europe super easy. So if you are, I don't know if she is based in the United States, but the place that I always recommend, the most pet friendly city I've ever been to thus far, and the easiest place to get to, is Mexico City. They are incredibly pet friendly. There's so many things to do with your dogs. There's so many dog related things there. Mexico City is really like bang for your buck. It's inexpensive, great food, great culture, great dog life. And it's not so hard to go to if you're in the US. So that's a big plus.
Okay, huge. Yes, she's from LA, so it's not too far.
Yeah, even better.
Yeah, quick flight. So can you talk real quick? You mentioned the pet passport. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so Europeans have, well, those in the European Union have a thing called a pet passport, which is like, you can only get one if you are in Europe. So you'd have to go there first. But once you get one from a vet, and they tend to be very inexpensive, it's basically the same thing as a human passport. Mm-hmm. But it only works within Europe or to and from Europe. And it just means that every time you're traveling within Europe or to and from Europe, you don't need to get all this new paperwork and go to the vet again and get all these new signatures. You already just have this passport that lets your pet in. So it's really easy. I really wish the US had something like that.
That's so cool. How fun. Get your little doggy pet stamp.
Right. And
Um,
a passport, like, has your pet's name and picture, and it's just like a passport.
right. So cute. I'd never heard of that before. Maybe I'm the only one, but I think that's fascinating. Okay, so Faye has a question. What do you do if you happen to sit next to someone who has pet allergies on the plane?
So I've never sat next to someone with allergies, but I once was flying from Mexico to the US, and it was a 3-seater row, and I was with my partner, and we each had a dog. And so unfortunately someone came and they were seated right in the middle between us, and that person did not like dogs. Totally understandable. The airline, the stewardess was super nice and just offered to switch that person's seat, and so that person was given a new seat, and we now had a free seat in between us, so we had even more space. So I mean, I found that airline workers tend to be very accommodating for both people, the person traveling with the dog and the person who doesn't want to be around dogs or has an allergy, etc.
Gotcha. Okay. They can move them around, it sounds like, if they need to.
Exactly.
Okay, so I have a question from Rachel. She's a first-time pet flyer here, and she's curious, do you have to take your dog's leash or collar harness off when you're going through security?
Yeah,
And
you do. Sorry, there's a follow-up.
Oh, that's okay. No, you can talk to that one.
Yeah,
You have to do that.
you do. Your dog has to go through security just like you do, through the metal detector thing. And they can't be wearing anything when they do. So you have to put that stuff through the conveyor belt thingy. And I carry my dog, but if your dog is too large to be carried, you can just walk them through.
They have to be pretty trained.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then any tips on this if they're too big to carry?
When going through security?
Yeah, when going through security.
I've always found that security the workers there have been super nice. So like, if you have to like physically hold your dog because you don't want them to run away or they're not trained enough, I think that would be fine as long as you walk through and you're with your dog.
Right.
It shouldn't be a
problem. Okay, let's see. So Deb has a question about potty time on a plane or train. How do you handle that? Do you use any medications for the pet while you're traveling? If you could speak to both of those, that would be great.
Yeah, so I don't use any medications for my dogs, but my dogs are pros at traveling on planes now. What I would recommend is starting with shorter flights so you can see how your dog does. Make sure, on the plane, your pets have to stay in their carrier. So make sure that your dog can stay in a carrier and is not going to freak out or want to come out of it. Work with them, train them. Like I said, practice makes perfect before the flight. In terms of going to the bathroom, a lot of airports have pet service areas. So I would map out where those pet service areas are, and if there are any, chances are there are, so that you can hit them up before going to your gate. I always do that. I always limit the amount of food and water my pets get before we travel. And always, most importantly for me, is I make my pets do a lot of activity before we fly, because I always say the best behaved dog is a tired dog. If your dog's tired, they're just going to sleep through everything. They're not going to care what's going on. They're going to stay in their cozy little carrier, and they're going to, sorry.
True.
My partner just alerted me to something. I have a post on my blog about pet service areas around the world with pictures and stuff, because they're all different. Some of them are great, some of them not so great. But anyway, so yeah, I would make sure that your dog is really tired, and I would limit the amount of water and food that you give them before flying. Okay. And then if someone is like really nervous about it, you can always put wee-wee pads in your carry-on. And if your dog is wee-wee pad trained, go into the restroom, be very neat about things. And if it's an emergency, they can use the wee-wee pad and you can clean up and really take care of stuff. But my dogs have been on super long flights and the bathroom has never been a problem.
Okay, good to know. I'm sure that's a scary one for everyone to think about. So thank you for addressing that. I have a question from Mary. She has heard that Ireland is pretty strict. So she's curious if you could fly to mainland Europe and then travel over to Ireland from there.
I don't know about Ireland's rules, but I've always found that as long as it's not an island, there are always ways around things. For example, the UK, England, you're not allowed to fly into England with a dog in the cabin. They can only be in cargo. That means that I would never fly to England with my dogs because I would never personally put my dogs in cargo. I have a pug and they have flat faces and they have breathing issues, so it's just not a good idea. But there are definitely ways to get to the UK, fly to Amsterdam, fly to Paris, and then take the Eurotunnel, or there's a ferry. So I'm sure that there is a way around it. I just don't know what it is. Apologies.
And I'm curious, why is it so difficult with the islands? Do they just have more restrictions?
It's because, yeah, they have more restrictions. A lot of these islands have eradicated rabies. So they have quarantine regulations for dogs. So for example, if you're going to Australia with the dog, your dog is going to have to quarantine. I think it's for 30 days. Yeah. And not only is that expensive, but it's just difficult to coordinate. It doesn't mean that you can just fly there on a whim. You're going to have to really plan things and make sure that there's space. You have a reservation, that you're giving, you're bringing and giving them the food that the dog will need for the entire duration of quarantine. You have all of the vet paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. They're just extra precautions that these places are taking so that those diseases don't come in.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
If people remember, but a couple years ago, Johnny Depp and his then wife flew to Amsterdam on their private jet and brought their 2 dogs and thought they could just get off the plane and, enjoy Australia with their 2 dogs. And Australia was like, no. And it was a really big deal.
So I've always heard about the quarantine. So is that mainly for islands, or is that in other countries around the world as well?
As far as I know, it's Australia, Japan. I think Iceland might have a quarantine period. It's mostly the islands.
Okay.
Curious. It's definitely not the majority. The quarantine thing is in the minority, but it exists.
Good to know. Was not aware of that. Let's see. Oh, Minerva has a question back on the pet passport. She's curious, how long is that valid for?
Oh, I forget, but it's a couple years for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's valid for a couple years. It's definitely worth getting. I mean, I know people who have gotten their pet passport for 10 euros.
Oh, it's cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap. I mean, and it depends on where you are, because you can get your pet passport in any European Union country. But it tends to be pretty cheap. And once you have it, you're just saving yourself a lot of time of not having to go to the vet back and forth, and money, because vet visits can be expensive, as we all know.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Chris and Sue's Go Walkies has a fun question. They're curious if you can get moved to sit next to a dog on a plane. Sometimes if you're allergic, you might not want to, but other people might really want to. Have you ever heard of that happening?
No, I've never heard of that, but it would be welcomed. I mean, I've had plane experiences where I get people who are just so excited to see my dog and pet my dog, and it's a wonderful experience for them. And then I've had other experiences where I have my dogs in their carrier and it's zipped up, and people don't even know that I have an animal with me. I've been on a plane where at the end of the ride, we're waiting to deboard, and I open up the carrier and people are like, oh my God, there's a dog there. And it's just because my dogs are so quiet, they sleep through the plane ride because I make sure they're really tired. So it's, the experience is just a whatever. It's not a big deal.
Right. Okay. So kind of along that question, Sarah has, she's curious. She one time was traveling, and in the first row on a flight, not in a carrier, she saw a dog out. And so have you ever seen that? How does that happen if they're supposed to be in the carrier?
Yes. So those are either service dogs or they're ESAs. An ESA is an emotional support dog. Something about that. Those are 2 very different things. Service dogs are dogs who perform a job that they are trained for. So, for example, a guide dog for a person who's visually impaired. That would be a service dog. And pretty much every country recognizes service dogs, and they're allowed to fly wherever and whenever. An ESA, which is an emotional support dog, is a dog that does not need to be trained, that provides some kind of emotional support for their owner, be it helping them stay calm, etc. So ESAs are only recognized within the United States. So if you are flying from France to Mexico and you have an ESA, the airlines will not recognize them. So they won't be allowed the same liberties that service dogs are allowed. But if you are flying anywhere within the United States or to any country where either the destination or the departure country is in the US, you can use an ESA.
Interesting. So I know for a lot of time for these service dogs, they tend to be a little bit larger than the ones that you can just put in a carrier. So how does that work? Are they allowed then on the flights, not in a carrier?
Yeah, absolutely. ESAs and service dogs are both allowed on the flight. They do not have to adhere to the same rules as other dogs, as passenger dogs. Excuse me. Usually they'll have like some kind of vest or something alerting people to the fact that they are an ESA or a service dog. Airlines are usually nice, and they'll usually like let them sit in the bulkhead row, which is that front row that has more space so that the dog has a bit more space. Yeah, so those are the dogs that you see that are not in carriers.
Gotcha. Okay. So they can be, so if there's space, they can be on the seat. They don't necessarily have to be underneath because there's probably no room for them anyway.
And it really depends on the flight attendant. I've been on flights where, like my flight from Brazil to New York, the flight attendants were super nice and they loved my dogs and they let me take them out of the carrier, which are not really allowed to do. And they let my dogs sleep on the seat. And, you know, my dogs were free. They were on the seat, they were in my lap, etc. It really just depends on the flight attendant and like if you're lucky or not, and you can kind of like get a vibe or a sense from them. There are other ones that are super strict and are like, you know, your dog has to stay in the carrier and it has to be zipped closed, but some will let you open that zipper or take the dog out. You know, it really depends. You just got to like feel the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of along those notes with them, a larger dog, Aaron is asking if you've ever known anyone who has successfully traveled with a Great Dane.
Yes, I know of a Great Dane who is an ESA who travels. Yeah, I mean, as long as the dog is trained, it's just, they just need to sit in place for however long that the flight is. And if they have the bulkhead row, there's space, extra space. Yeah, it's not a problem. I mean, people do it.
Yeah, and I'm sure now, especially, I mean, I know a lot of the airlines have the middle seat available, and who knows how that's going to be moving forward, but I haven't traveled since the pandemic hit, but I know a lot of people, I know there's some airlines where it's packed, but I know there's others where it's somewhat empty. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that progresses with dogs. And if it's maybe even easier if there's extra space.
When I flew from Brazil to New York at the end of March, when COVID was like kind of just starting to get crazy in New York, it was like the easiest experience I had flying with pets. Because, you know, usually you have to like show all this paperwork when you get into the US, and my cat was flying in cargo, so they'd have to like check him and check his paperwork. But they were just like, they like left my cat by the baggage claim and like nobody was there. Someone could have stolen him. Yeah, they were just like, get out of here. Like they just wanted us out of the airport. They didn't check any of our documentation.
Oh, wow. Okay, I have just one more question. If anyone else has any others, feel free to drop it in the chat, but I think we got to everyone. Great questions, by the way. So curious if you ever use pet sitters to watch your pets while you're away, or have you always brought them with you?
I have, one time I'm from Guatemala and I went to visit family for just a week. And so because it was going to be a shorter trip, I didn't really want to go through the hassle of all the vet visits and stuff. And it would be a lot of time with family. And so it just wasn't like a dog type of trip. So I left my dogs with good friends.
Yeah.
I have not used a pet sitter.
And then I was curious, in terms of bringing dog food or finding the, you know, the type of dog food that you use, how do you go about doing that when you're traveling to a different country?
Yeah, so I make my dog's food. And the ingredients are just like ingredients that you can pretty much find anywhere in the world. Pretty basic vegetables and chicken and stuff. So my dogs eat human food and they're like, you know, it's easy to cook. That's why prefer to stay in Airbnbs to have a kitchen to do that. So that like really frees us up a lot, because we're not lugging around dog food with us. I think, you know, in the US, the amount of available dog food, like in terms of brands and different types, is just so much larger than in the countries I've been to abroad. You know, here you walk into a pet store and there's like 100 different types of dog food, whereas you walk into a pet store somewhere else and there's like 10 different types of dog food. So if your dog eats special food or only one kind of food, you might just have to bring it with you.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow, that's a great tip. Oh, and Erica just dropped in the chat the link to Candy's homemade dog food. So definitely check that out. This has been amazing. I really appreciate all of you joining us and asking such great questions. I think, I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like my dog is really attached to me now, especially since we've been home forever. So I think learning about how to travel with your pet is just so important, because I know they're going to want to come with us even more so than before. So thank you so much, Candy. I really appreciate it. Before we leave, I'm just going to share my screen real quick and let you, hold on one second. See if you guys, can everyone see this? One moment. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about some of the upcoming events we have, such as ones like this. We always have such a variety of topics, and it's definitely for whatever interest you have. So we hope you can join us at some of the future ones we have coming up. Next week, we actually have a few. So on Tuesday, we have Leah coming to us, talking to us about how to volunteer on farms around the world. I know she's done this at a couple places, so it'll be interesting to hear about her experience, and just if it's something you're interested in, learning how to go about doing that. On Wednesday, we have the one and only Nomadic Matt, who's going to talk to us all about travel hacking. I know he's been doing this since the beginning, so he's an expert and can share all of his useful tips with us, which is hugely important now. We can rack up all those points, so when the world opens up, we can start traveling again. And then on Thursday, we actually have 3 events. So we kick it off with Carmela, which is she's going to be talking about Flight, which is a nonprofit organization that Matt is part of as well, and how to, or what student travel is going to look like moving forward in the pandemic. We have David Hunter Bishop, who's going to be talking about how you can travel as a retiree on the road, doing this solo, having adventure and fun. And then on Thursday evening, I'm actually going to be hosting this. We're having the California Travel Happy Hour. So we've been doing these throughout different cities in the US and around the world. And it's not necessarily open to just those of you from California. Anyone can really join, but it's a little bit different than how we did it today. It's a bit more casual where everyone can speak. Sometimes we'll have a topic where everyone can share their personal stories. We might have games. So it's kind of how we took those in-person meetups and moved them virtually. So definitely check the calendar for those. You can find maybe one that's coming into a city near you, or feel free to join any of them. And then definitely look at the calendar, because we have a lot of events, I think, scheduled all the way through February with tons of different topics. So make sure you check that out. And then again, I just wanted to talk about the Patreon community. Since the pandemic hit, the Nomadic Network, Nomadic Matt, have really pulled a lot of valuable content to us through these virtual events. The speakers, like I mentioned, did this out of the kindness of their hearts. So this is just a way we can give back to the community for all they have given us. So definitely go ahead and check out the Patreon community at patreon.com/Nomadic Matt if you're interested in doing a monthly subscription to get all these fantastic exclusive perks. And then again, if that's something you can't do at this time, you can always do a one-time donation via PayPal. Again, not mandatory, but just something if you're willing to do, it'd be great to support our community with that. And thank you all for coming today. This was so wonderful to see so many people learning about how to travel with the dog. I appreciate you all for being so engaging, asking great questions. Candy, thank you so much for your wonderful insight. It, to me, makes me feel a little bit more comfortable if I'm going to travel with my pet. So I really appreciate that, and hope to see you all at a future event.
Thank you everyone so much. Don't forget, you can travel local too.
Yes, practice.
Yeah, Matt really taught me that. Like, go to a new neighborhood.
It's so important.